would love to basically bring everybody in and be the voice of the community. Scale fast.
March because of South by I have 2 months. Yep.
We already have a bunch of your customers. Revenue coming in already. So we might reach 50K revenue by March.
Hey everybody, we're going to get started in just a few minutes. Just need a little more time for people to trickle in. Thanks.
Yeah, of the office elevators.
Like a new day of the week.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we're going to get a few of you high-set people showing up more frequently.
Absolutely.
When I went to the other side.
Just testing 1, 2, 3. Try to step on your core.
It's like
How are things going?
I'll forget the tag. I'll get it out to there and it'll pop off.
Probably are more up in the details than I am at the moment. Just because it's so relevant.
I follow the group, but I
Yeah.
didn't
So she and I.
Yeah, I will. I should take you and Alex, but
I
trust the legislation.
Yeah, and I was like, oh.
I know exactly.
The picture that she has is great.
Trust that whatever needs to be done is going to be done. Well, no, that's good. No, that's good.
Oh, now I'm like, and now
don't
it's
want to
like
see
I'm
trigger happy with posting.
that are more recent. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
So they grew this as well as the full page, and they said it's for 2 reasons. One is you read, and 2, they don't have to cut. When they run out of because they want to print, they don't have to do
they write so quickly that it's always not. Does it matter?
easier to do
The type, yes.
because the sun is just like even glasses doesn't.
Yeah, it is very difficult, and people get confused as to amongst other things.
Yeah, we got a decent crowd. All right. Actually, let me just go check our live stream's going, and then we'll get started. I'll be right back, everybody.
Since we're waiting, anybody here needs to register or update addresses? Just in case you moved.
We can check everybody in the room.
It is true.
It will be very on theme.
So.
Okay, I literally see it running on the computer. And yeah, I'll be taking announcements from the community, so if you just want to share, yeah, definitely.
And I forgot.
Okay, and
This is
where
one of
is
the
the other
which
mics?
is like, yeah, I don't think they'll have that one. Yeah, and it's already been out.
Right here.
Alright, sounds alright.
That one hasn't been
Okay,
because
cool.
this is free screening.
Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to the first EFF Austin meetup of 2019, and on a new day of the week. Happy to see it still seems to be working for a lot of people, so we'll see how this goes in the coming year. For those, I see old and new faces. For those of you who are first timers, my name is Kevin Welch. I am the current president of the board here at EFF Austin. EFF Austin is a long-standing, going on almost 30 years now, local digital civil liberties organization founded around the same time as Electronic Frontier Foundation based in San Francisco. They are the nation's preeminent nonprofit that defends your digital civil liberties, things like net neutrality, encryption, stopping NSA spying, all that good stuff. So, we are the oldest member of what they call the Electronic Frontier Alliance. It's a network of affiliate organizations all around the country. If there are any of you here tonight who are not from Austin, you should either consider locating an EFA member in your city or potentially starting your own chapter. There's monthly teleconference meetings and it's a lot of fun. You get to learn about all the cool stuff people are doing all around the country on these issues. I'm going to go over a few things we have coming up in the coming year here before I turn it over to our speaker. Let's see, first of all, we're going to have our meetup next month in February. Once again, the same new time, second Tuesday of February at 7 p.m. here at Cap Factory. We're going to have a couple local hackers and pen testers basically do a live doxing demonstration where one of them has doxed the other one. And they're going to talk to you about how to protect yourself so that you can't be doxed the way he doxed the other one. So for those of you wanting to increase your digital security footprint, that should be a very fun and interesting one to attend. We also have a number of other ones that are potentially in the pipeline that are not scheduled yet. We're probably going to have a talk from somebody from Austin Freenet at some point in the coming year. We're going to probably have a talk at some point from a gentleman who runs a website that basically posts undercover videos taken of the Mormon Church's secret ceremonies. So that should be fascinating. What else we got coming up? One of our board members, John Lukowski, he's probably going to give a talk that sounded really trippy and crazy, but I'm not remembering the title at this point in time. But for those of you who've been at all following his conversation with Bruce Sterling on the Well online, if you want just very heady intellectual talk about the world and the future and what the internet is turning us all into, that'll be a fun one. Let's see. So as some of you know, today was the first day of the 86th session of the Texas Legislature. Nothing too eventful happened. Dennis Bond is speaker like we all thought he'd be, yay, or no yay. But anyway, so EFF Austin is currently engaged in doing some political advocacy and advice work on a number of bills that are currently being floated. If you are interested in that work, of which we certainly need help, we need people who potentially are available during business hours to go to the Capitol. We need experts to potentially give expert advice on bills, to propose language changes to them. There is a lot of work to be done, and if you're interested in that, get with me afterwards. I will put you in touch with our VP, Alex, who's leading our legislative effort. A few other things coming up. We are currently a sponsor of the ACT Lab 2019 conference, which will be this June at the Vortex Theater. It's basically going to be a 2-day weekend conference. For those of you who don't know, ACT Lab is a now defunct but dearly beloved program that used to exist at UT, run under academic Sandy Stone, one of the world's leading cross-media theorists, basically. And it's basically going to be a 2-day conference talking about makerish things and futurist things, and it's going to be a total blast. So they're both doing a call for proposals right now. So if you are a maker or an academic type and would like to present, you should go to their website, which I think is actlab2019.org, but you should go there and answer the call for proposals. Also, there's going to be a planning session for ACT Lab happening tomorrow between 11 p.m. and 2 p.m., first at the Vortex Theater, and then at Hoover's afterwards for lunch. So if you would like to help make it happen, either via manpower or money, you should go to that. Also, we are in the early stages of trying to start EFF Austin movie nights. These are going to basically be, we're going to alternate between fun, fictional, cyberpunkish movies as well as informative documentaries. We are tentatively doing the last Thursday of this month as our first date, and we're tentatively going to show the 1990 documentary Cyberpunk, which features interviews from William Gibson and Timothy Leary. So if you want a blast from the past, that should be fun. there will be more details I'll be providing about that. It will be necessary to RSVP for the event. It's also serving as a fundraiser both for EFF Austin and our sponsoring venue space. So there will be a $20 donation to attend, but know that you're supporting a good cause if you do come. We will be sending out more information about that. I've spoken a mouthful. And we'll probably be doing something for South by Southwest, probably some kind of happy hour party. Maybe not quite as big as last year since we're working on making Act Lab happen, but there will be something, so stay tuned. Oh yeah, and as always, we are a nonprofit that happens purely via the hard work and efforts of our volunteers. So please give us your money if you like this stuff and want it to keep happening. I dropped the ball and do not currently have the ability to take digital payments tonight, but I can take your cash if you are so inclined. So yeah, without further ado, let's see, before I turn over my speaker, is there any announcements from the community that anybody would like to share? Shameless self-promotion is completely allowed. If you think it's something that this community would be interested in, share it now.
Regarding the 2019 legislature, I'm actually summarizing the bills, whatnot.
Oh yes, David is doing some summarizations on some of the bills that will be appearing on our website shortly.
Yeah, they'll be up tonight. One of them actually is regarding your subject here, and I think it actually kind of helps it. It's HB 140. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I would figure you would.
I want to pick your brain about that after. It's okay. Yeah.
Great.
What do we follow? If we want to, you're summarizing it where?
It's going to be on the EFF Austin blog.
Oh, the website, effaustin.org, the main page. There'll be some blog entries we'll have about it. And of course, our speaker's probably going to talk more about that bill. Anybody else have any announcements? John Manilow.
The homebrew Mozart's meetup at 6:30 for the Indie Web group.
Oh yeah, that's right. We like to profile their meetup because, hey, IndieWeb is awesome. If we want to defeat the Facebooks of the world, we need IndieWeb. So, go to their meetups, 6:30 at Mozart's Coffee tomorrow. I meant to send out more of an announcement about that, but it's been a busy week. But you've all heard now, so go to that. Anybody else?
So everybody here is registered, but you can also become a VDR. There are like a ton of sessions, trainings throughout the month of January. They're trying to get 1,000 volunteers deputized. I got the first weekend. If anybody moved, you can fix your address with me.
Yes, I'm quite confident everybody who attends EFF Austin meetups is registered to vote, but I doubt all of you are voter registrars. So yes, look into that because there's probably plenty of people we still need to register. John, you have one more announcement?
Let's say now that there's no longer a scheduled between EFF Austin and the ISC squared meetings every month. Next Monday, and indeed, they're going to have the cloud security talks for Azure and AWS services. So benefit, free pizza, beer. Generally a pretty happening crowd, so, but it's on Eventbrite.
Sounds good. All right, finally, since I ever rambled more than long enough, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Our speaker this month is Jeremy Smith. Jeremy is the Executive Director of Register to Vote, a Texas 501c4 focused on increasing access to voting rights, and a founder of Blue Squad, a progressive political tech company. He's a West Point graduate who served 5 years in the Army as an engineer and special operations officer. He's also a Marshall Scholar who studied infectious diseases epidemiology at Imperial College London. After leaving the military, he worked for the Hillary Clinton campaign as the Director of Plans and Operations for Voter Protection in Florida, where he helped recruit, train, and coordinate more than 6,000 attorneys countering voter suppression. Since then, he's worked on the Doug Jones campaign in Alabama, and he's been helping support candidates across Texas. And Jeremy's going to be speaking to us tonight about 2 tech projects he's been leading, Register to Vote and Map the Vote. They're 2 nonprofit projects that use public records and simple technology to help voters and volunteers navigate around Texas's archaic laws that are often attributed for us having the lowest rate of voter registration in the nation. If you want to follow along with these tools, you can go to mapthe.vote or register the number 2 vote.org, but I'm sure he will have slides if you didn't get that. So without further ado, take it away, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. That was very kind. I like the idea of speaking to a group that is interested in defending online privacy and civil liberties, digital civil liberties, with a talk about how we can find everyone's name and address on the internet. It's going to be great.
I may be grilling you about that.
I'm happy to take any questions. So, I'm basically going to give you a quick 5 to 10 minute spiel, and then I'll just open the floor to any and every question imaginable.
Oh, actually, and I meant to say one slight disclaimer. We have a lot of people here tonight. In the interest of hearing from everybody in the room, I'm going to encourage all of you to ask just one question at a time of our speaker, and then wait till some other people have talked before you ask another one, and try to keep your question under a minute, please. Thank you.
And so, following that, we will, I will give you, anybody, an answer on any topic you really like on this subject. My goal is to give you some context and the framework and kind of the way we're trying to approach it and make it easier for folks. So, kind of the background context on the slide here is just a collection of newspaper articles and reports in the country. Can everybody, you guys hear me in the back? Just make sure. Texas is last in voter registration in the country, out of every state and DC, and last in turnout. And sometimes we compete for that honor with Mississippi and Idaho. Right now, after this last election, we're going to be 49th. So, props to Texas, everybody. All right.
Beating Mississippi.
One step at a time, right? And so, to that end, there's a unique law in Texas that's unlike any other state in the country, which is that if you want to register somebody in Texas with these forms here, which you give me a prop hold up, right? In any other state, you could walk up to someone, give them that form, help them fill it out, and you could go take it to their county for them if they're too busy to turn it themselves. In Texas, you have to be certified by that person's county every even-numbered year in order to help them fill out a form. And that is a unique law that is left over from a previous era where the state was interested in keeping federal registrars and students from driving down on buses to help register former sharecroppers in Texas. And we just haven't gotten rid of the law. And so it has a pernicious effect of reducing the number of people working on voter registration during political campaigns and other issue advocacy work like EFF from doing organized voter registration by several orders of magnitude compared to places like Florida. So Florida has about half the voting population that Texas does, even though it's the next largest state. And in Florida, they get a roughly 12 to 15 times more voter registrations per year from advocacy groups and everybody else, simply because anyone could help their neighbor, could help their friend or their family member. But in Texas, does anybody here not live in Travis County? Anybody live across the line? So for example, let's pretend I live in Hayes County, or let's say I live in Williamson, but I'm still in Austin, Texas. If I tell you, oh, I'm from Austin, can I register to vote? You would say, sure, not realizing perhaps, unless you checked, am I actually in Travis County? Because you are deputized in Travis County, presumably not yet Williamson County as well. So in helping me register to vote, you have now committed a felony. You will go to jail for 5 years. The Texas Attorney General.
Do the right thing for
and you would lose your right to vote for having committed a federal crime. And so the Texas Attorney General and the governor have been aggressive at trying to root out what they consider to be people fraudulently, going around and vote harvesting. And so it has put a chilling effect on the number of groups in Texas since about 2000. And so as a result, Texas's voter registration rate has just plummeted, and the turnout rate has gone pretty much along with it. There's other things that go along with that. If people perceive a state to be uncompetitive, that affects turnout. You can see here on this graph these are the demographics by racial group in Texas. And the most significant one is that the second largest population in Texas, the Hispanic population, more than a third are actually under the age of 18. And so I think the Asian population is roughly comparable at 28%. And so there's just actually a lot of people in Texas who aren't 18 yet, but who will cross that threshold in the next couple of years, and there will be this massive wave of people who are all of a sudden eligible to vote. So there's a little bit of a skew in the demographics, because if you look at Midwest states or Northeast states, you'll see a lot more of a standard population pyramid. So Texas has some unique challenges, and in particular, a coming burden on the bureaucratic system of 254 counties that have individual trainings that you have to attend one by one to get certified to then help people in that county. They each have to maintain individual records, pay people to process paper forms, Everybody in here has excellent handwriting, I'm sure. Like, you very clearly annotate your address, your name. You notify the county when you get married and change and update your name. I'm sure you all thought to do that. The most common reason for someone's ballot, when you mail in a ballot, to be discounted is that you have changed your last name because you are most likely a woman who got married and were following that norm. As a result, someone will use their Mark 1 eyeball to look at your signature and they will say, this doesn't look the same, and they throw it in a bin that says, do not count, and they don't have to tell you if that happens. And so I doubt many of you, after the 2018 election, I don't want to shame anybody about whether you voted, but just if you did vote, did you think to check online with your county to see whether or not your vote was actually tallied? That's public domain. So there's just a lot of steps in just making sure the process goes off without a hitch that are unclear to almost all of us. And the idea that we should all have to become election experts temporarily for about 1 week every 2 years is kind of inconvenient. So our goal was to try to help reduce this effect by using digital tools. So right now, the best method in Texas that most groups are engaged in is the hard work of dedicated volunteers who literally carry around forms to their meetings to help other people get registered to vote and trigger your memory to help you participate. And my goal was to take everybody's supercomputer that's residing in your pocket or on the desk right now and essentially enable us to sign one another up and kind of simplify that process. So to that end, I came back to Texas in 2018 and brought in an engineer here from Austin to build this website called Register to Vote. We had to go with the number 2 because some guy in Germany owns Register TO Vote, and he wants $50,000 for that. And he's had it since 2000, so it's a great market price. We can all tell he's doing very well. It's okay, we turned it into a gimmick. We're asking each of you to try to register 2 other voters, and we'll be done in a year, so it'll be great. So our insight was that in Texas, there's no online voter registration. We're one of 10 states that doesn't use online voter registration. For historic reasons, and people believe that it will enable one political party over the other, even though there are numerous red states that do have online voter registration, and it is vastly cheaper. It's also much easier to check for fraud. It's if you have a clear record where you're not trying to read someone's chicken scratch from a Walmart parking lot on a hot day in July. So what we do is you can sign anybody up on this website. It's mobile optimized. Any volunteer in the state can use it. You can text it to friends. People can put it out on various digital mediums. The form that person fills out is pre-printed onto that standard form there with some, kind of foolproof instructions. A giant finger arrow that says "sign here." It is mailed out to the voter with the tracking code so we can tell when it reaches them. As soon as the post office says it's arrived in their mailbox, they get an automatic email and text message with a picture of what's in their mailbox and says, hey, be on the lookout for this. This is an official piece of mail. It's not spam. Please, pull it out. All you have to do is sign it and send it back. There's an envelope that's prepaid and pre-addressed to your county already inside. So we never need to see it again. You just take it out, you sign it, you put it back in the prepaid envelope. All of that is an automated process. So from the moment someone types it in to the moment it prints out, gets to the person, goes back to the county, every piece of that is tracked with a barcode. So we know if Jeremy Smith puts his form back in the mail, and that gives us insight onto, did I complete this process? So if someone signed me up very helpfully on their phone, the form comes to me. If I don't mail it back, we can tell, and after a week, you get another prompt with a helpful email and a text message that just says, hey, did we get something wrong? Is there anything we can do to fix that for you? If you just put this back in the mail, you have the choice of voting in November, and it's that easy. So this system took a lot of work to connect the post office, public data records, political groups, advocacy groups, just to use, essentially was a lot of public data, but it immediately checks whether someone is registered to vote as well. So you can essentially encounter somebody, check whether they're registered, get confirmation, have that peace of mind, and then save the state money, save the county money, but not saying a volume of forms. So we pitched that to the state, the Secretary of State, who actually thought it was so useful to them that they funded half of this this last year, to just on the basis that it saves them so much money and labor by reducing the number of duplications. And so we registered about 150,000 people for less than $50,000 over the last, really just in September and October of 2018. And of that, about 85% of those people voted. So the highest county turnout rate in the state was about 61% here in Travis County. Most of the state was below 50%. But this program worked well enough because there are all these reminders to folks, and we make it easy. We knock down every barrier we can using entirely digital systems to circumvent what are mostly just bureaucratic or negligent, kind of problems that arise for folks. So to that end, we built this because we wanted to help people register their own friends, their own family, their own neighbors, and kind of reduce the interference by third parties. And many of us are very helpful interveners who will walk around and bother you and badger you into registering to vote. But we think it actually works better if people just kind of own it in their own community. So we built this map and deployed it this last year, which is a publicly available map that is free for anyone to use. And it shows you all of these green dots are current people who are unregistered, they're not registered to vote. And that's roughly where I live. It's actually precisely where I live. We can pan it around. But the idea there is these are individual households that you can zoom into on your phone at any time. You can find exactly who is not registered, and you can go throughout your own neighborhood and help your folks while you're walking the dog, while you're exercising, while you're visiting, attending a house party, chatting with friends, whatever that reason is. You have two tools that make it easy to identify whether someone is registered to vote, just so that we make it a norm in society that this is an important thing. Everyone should have the choice, at least, of voting. Because right now, even though we are all citizens, if you're not registered to vote, you don't have the option of voting in an election until you actually fill out this form and send it into the right person and confirm that they processed it on time. If you don't do each of those things, you show up to vote. It doesn't matter how long you've been a citizen. It doesn't matter in what capacity. You won't be allowed to vote. And so it's merely this bureaucratic hurdle that we've accepted kind of in the way. And so with a digital reminder system, we can actually keep track of everyone in the state and try to make sure that they all have that opportunity to vote. So that's what this map functionally does. It works anywhere in Texas. I think I'm off the Wi-Fi at the moment, so you're all just getting the static image version, but I can hotspot it and show you. But right now it's just map.vote or a number of other URLs related to that all point back to the same spot. You can look it up anywhere in Texas, and pretty shortly, in the next month, it'll work anywhere in the country. So we built some scrapers that use the post office's data and an open source data group called Open Addresses to identify every address in the country and then run them through the post office to determine whether they're residential or commercial. We then match those back to publicly available property data and county voter registration data. We pull all that together to screen out everyone who's already registered to vote so we don't bother them. And this gets you straight to the people who are not yet registered. And there's a couple of reasons that might be. They could be a non-citizen. They could be a felon still serving probation now that they're out of prison. It could be that someone has been declared legally mentally incompetent. It could be an Airbnb or other short-term rental, and it could be someone's second or more home that they own. But that's about 20% false positive rate is what that comes to in Texas, and based on our testing over the last year. So about 80% of these dots are actually, and they tend to occur in clusters, of course, are unregistered eligible people in Texas who could vote if given the option. And we think the best people to reach them are their own friends and family and neighbors. So to that end, we made this widely available with the intent that anyone could use it for their own best practices, for their own ideas inside their own community. And our register to vote works in about 9 languages right now. And we actually send those forms out in those languages so that we can help folks who have immigrated here and might be citizens now but still struggle with English and might not know why it is that you need to fill out this form. So there's a little explanation that comes from someone in their own language, sometimes with videos that we've been filming to give to folks so they kind of understand what's going on. To that end, our plan is to expand this map and increase its functionality, add some gamification layers. You sign in with a single email authentication. That's just so we can track to make sure that there aren't malicious actors claiming to have registered 10,000 people a minute in a particular ethnic area. Ever since we built both of these websites in the summer, we have been under like siege from foreign servers, along with every other voter registration group in the country. Vote.org and TurboVote both had their websites taken down, all of their domains destroyed, much of their database sets ruined. We were very fortunate to be already under Cloudflare at that time and not that important. So we managed to kind of hold up over the past year. But there's just a number of problems with operating in the 501c3 or C4 space right now with cybersecurity. There's just a number of groups that have kind of taken a shining to picking us apart. So we use commercial grade defense right now. The biggest expense of this map is the cybersecurity suite. The rest of it's less than $100 a month. So, but yeah, so that map we're making widely available. We have gamification. We keep track of what everybody's doing, award badges and points, and we'll have a little leaderboard that lets you know how close you are to like your neighbors and everything else, and kind of implement this more widely and share it amongst other groups. And it's got a couple of open public APIs so people can pull that information for other types of charities who are working in this space to enable them to work with the latest data. And so it's constantly pulling from whatever is publicly available from counties, states, and commercial vendors, and then other people are putting that information back in as they register them to vote in whatever modality they use. So you have groups who do it by mail, groups that do it in person, groups who do it in online in various forms. People print their PDF and send it in, and we pull all of that together to show you what the latest status is. And these actually change colors as you interact with them or as someone takes an action anywhere on our ecosystem. And the goal is just to be that kind of clearinghouse of coordination using entirely like open source coding and volunteer developers. So we've built this with the intent to make it easy for anyone else with a good idea to take it away and run a really great program and just make those data sets public. So to that end, we're going to keep working on this and expanding it across the country, working with partner groups. And we encourage everyone to try it out in your own neighborhood and creep out your neighbors by being like, you're just a dot on my map and I'm supposed to come here. And of course, defending everybody's online privacy. We don't put any names on it. We don't put anybody, we try not to make it scrapable in that regard. And we only show a limited data set at a time, depending on where you're looking, so that no one can harvest everyone's address in some sort of malicious way, even though all of them are just, they're literally public data. So, does anybody have any questions? I'd be glad to go ahead.
How are you funded?
So mostly I paid for it from savings from the Army, and we had a few folks near the end of the election come in to say, I'd like to do a specific program in Dallas, and we were happy to accommodate that. But it is a 501c4, and depending on our needs, we might take a little bit more funding from some like institutional grants, or there's a couple of folks in Austin who've been very generously giving $5 a month, and we're happy to report you get 10 voters for every $5. So very low overhead when you take it. You don't pay people for labor. Yes.
I'm curious, where do the majority of your DDoS attacks originate from?
So
I have a guess,
yeah,
but I'd like to hear you say it.
Yeah. The servers are mostly in 3 particular regions. The one you might be most surprised about is Germany. The second one is the Middle East, which has large-scale criminal networks that are available for sale, and the third one is from the Russian Federation, and so they've been very friendly.
I mean, two of those make a lot of sense. Do you have theories on why Germany is so popular?
Germany has a number of tech companies that have easily accessible server farms, and somebody misuses those. I'm pretty sure that's probably what it's limited to. I think they're called like Stasi.internet or something. So. That's an old Eastern European joke for those who know your Cold War history. Please.
What scraping technology do you use?
Selenium, mostly, and that's just because the young woman who built it was very gifted in that particular language, very experienced. And I would have to ask our technical director if we're running anything else. I'm pretty sure the Selenium script is what's doing the bulk of the work on the post office's website.
Do you know what language bindings?
I don't. We've gone through 3 iterations, and I'm not entirely sure at this moment only because we've just now been upgrading. And that's an easy one, though. She wasn't able to be here tonight because she's having surgery, but our senior engineer is a very talented, longtime member of this community, and so if y'all know Matt on the evening, she's very, very good at this.
I'm sure John can probably pull a view source on us if we're really curious.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
tell us in a minute.
literally, I don't mind either. Like, this is designed to be something that the community can improve and take to a new level, so.
Do you have repos up?
We do, we have public repos up.
GitHub, I assume?
Yep. And so this aspect of the map is totally freely available, and we're happy for people to use it in any way and try to improve upon it. And we have a large Slack channel full of volunteers who take a track at particular projects and build out features on a volunteer basis. So, Russ?
You mentioned integrating with property and county tax records. That's a lot of different sites, I assume?
It's a lot of different sites, and they change very haphazardly. You could not tell me what's different about some of those pages, but they get broken very easily. But it's just a lot of manual work that we check. We run a function that checks to see if the scraping is working correctly, and when it flags an issue, we go to that page and hunt around and figure out what they moved to a different page. And it's 254 counties in Texas, then you have like parishes in Louisiana and commonwealths in Virginia, and I mean, it gets more complex. There's also things that are fun, like Austin the city is not in Austin the county, and Houston the city is not in Houston the county, but I guarantee you all of your autofills would try to put the wrong county into this right now. My favorite one, county. Most people write USA, doesn't really get you to completion. So we have some automatic corrections to that prevent those errors. If anybody puts Austin City and Austin County, we don't even bother telling them they got it wrong. We just go ahead and fix it.
Just by engine it.
Yeah.
I apologize, I walked in late, so I didn't hear you talk about the source of your voter information. I assume you're using like publicly available.
The publicly available files from the counties themselves and the Secretary of State.
Are you cleaning those in any way?
We are cleaning the heck out of them.
Okay.
So we dedupe them, and we standardize the addresses, and then we standardize the property addresses, none of which has any rhyme or reason to the way it's done. And that took us a lot of effort to improve over the course of 7 months. Then we put all that together, we run match rates, we look at the post office, that's what's called a National Change of Address Registry. So if any of you recall moving recently, you filled out a change of address confirmation most likely if you wanted to have your mail forwarded to you. If you didn't know you could do that, it's very useful. Also, we get great data, so please do. And then that alerts us when people move to Texas. And so we will keep track of, also when county, property sales occur, we flag that. And then we go and look and see, did Jeremy Smith move out of his home? And we're gonna put that back on the map now, and we're gonna put his new address on the map, because now, 2 different subsets of people need to get registered at new addresses. And we're always looking for better commercial data about who lives where. Coke is perfectly happy to sell Coca-Cola to anybody regardless of address. So a lot of the big entities like Google and Facebook actually don't have great fidelity on where precisely people live right now. They have a good idea of what zip code, what precinct, or whatnot you might live in. But it's really hard to get good information about where people live. Even registered voter data is only accurate about 85% of the time. Go ahead.
You mentioned something that I wasn't previously aware of, which is that you can look up whether or not your vote was actually tabulated.
Yes.
Is there any recourse for finding out that
There isn't. Certainly missed your chance. Before the election occurs, you can go in person and you can essentially contest why your vote wasn't counted.
So if you early vote, you can contest.
That's right. If you tried to do it on the day of, you wouldn't have time to find out that it wasn't going to be counted. If you vote by mail in advance, if you're like over 65 or going to be out of town, or if you early vote and then you find out it wasn't, you can check online, you can see it's not recorded, then you can go back to that county, you can call them and verify that your vote has been taken in. And if not, they have to tell you why. But if after the fact, they still have to tell you why, but it's too late.
so you can't pull together like a class action lawsuit of a bunch of people that were discounted?
You could if it was a clear reason. Yeah, if you had enough people, you definitely could. We're looking into things like that. So right now we're working with the UT Journalism School with all of their master's students in the data journalism class to do FOIA requests. So we're going to FOIA every county in the state for why people were either prevented from registering or prevented from voting. And we're gonna look for patterns in each of those counties. Because it turns out, I falsely assumed that political parties and other groups must, of course, be watching because you want to make sure you're in a fair fight. None of them, Republicans nor Democrats or anybody else, is ever looking. And so I find that crazy. So we're going to look for them, and we're going to make a public data set that shows you, here's all the people who were deleted from the voter rolls.
Could you, do you know off the top of your head, at least for those of us in Austin, what the website to check if your vote was counted was?
It's called Vote Travis. And I can hotspot myself and demonstrate to you all, but you essentially, no matter where you are in the country, you search, X county elections, whatever that is, and that will always get you to the right place. You go in there, and somewhere in a very bad UI, you will find access to a place to search. And so you can find out whether your vote was actually counted for every election. And you might be surprised to find out it's not. The reason I got into all of this, I was deployed in 2012, tried to vote by absentee. I'm from Texas, and I voted in 08, but I didn't vote in 2010. Turned out I'd been deleted for unknown reasons, and they told me I wasn't allowed to vote, and I was like, well, I guess I did something wrong. I come to find that it's actually just sometimes my name is extremely common, Jeremy Smith. There's other people named Jeremy Smith who, with my exact middle name here in this county, and maybe one of them committed a felony, maybe my mail was forwarded to me overseas, so maybe they thought that I wasn't here anymore. But even though I was in the military deployed, there's no recourse because of the deadline. So. Yes?
Can you use the same methods to look at whether people have voted in the past and use that sort of information, say this is a high value person because he's not registered, but he's registered 6 times?
That's like the most common way that you would be contacted by political parties during primaries, especially, is like if you've done it before. But anybody in this room could go request and get access to the voting history of every person in Texas, and every person in the country, really.
But you're not integrating that into...
We aren't showing that in that regard, largely because unregistered people don't have a voting history attached to them. Even if we could find a commercial record for me, let's say I'm not registered to vote, there would be no ID number to match to in the state's file for a voting record of voting in other states. Does that make sense? But so we'd have to find a commercial record of me in another state or somewhere else where I had previously voted, and then you could figure something out like that. So I am looking for those sorts of needles, and sometimes we're able to get hits. Mostly if someone has a pretty unique name. It gets very difficult to try to figure out exactly who is in a house if they aren't registered to vote, if they don't own property, that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Why don't people vote?
No, it's a fair question. So Pew has done incredible research on this topic, and it's all publicly available. So the number one reason that people give is that they don't think it matters. The second thing, which is distinct from the not mattering, the not mattering is like their vote can't affect the change. The second thing is that they don't perceive that the government or people who are in elected office represent them or would listen to them anyway. The third thing is they didn't know there was an election, they don't know how. They were embarrassed and intimidated when they went there, and somebody said, they acted like that person was an idiot for not knowing how to do the weird little dial thing, like rotary phone voting method we have here in Travis County. They felt belittled or whatever. They were prevented. That's the fourth largest reason. So in 2016, it was like 2.5 million people tried to vote in various places in the country and were turned away for not being registered, for not having been dropped off the rolls, for having moved and not updated their address, whatever the reason. They didn't have ID and they couldn't come back. So those are really the four big categories. By far the largest and the second largest are not believing that the whole thing works for them. And that's just a
80% or 50%?
Yeah, I want to say it's more like 55 to 60% of those those two categories together. And they've done there's a lot of delineations inside those Pew studies and other studies that show the specific phrases people use. like a word cloud style, and it's very telling that there's a sense of that, like, this stuff doesn't work for them. And that's part of, like, the idea behind this is we shouldn't have to rely on someone who begins running a year from now, has to win a nomination, hire up staff, you know, come out and try to talk to 500,000 of us to get our vote for Congress. When we have friends and neighbors and community members who are better informed, there's groups like this where people attend weekly or monthly or whatever to essentially stay informed on topics. Those are actually better communities of like-minded individuals with similar values that are better for approaching these sorts of things. And so this is designed to help groups like that, kind of, if they want to articulate their actions through voting. Does that make sense?
There was a good article you can Google about San Antonio area voters who are lower socioeconomic or minority, and how they just think their vote doesn't matter, and they're almost proud of not voting. What turned it around in many cases was a younger, enthusiastic family member going and begging them to vote, like, do it for me, please do it for me.
Yep.
And so that's out there. If you just, like, San Antonio, there's a good write-up on San Antonio.
It seems like, so in chemistry, there's an activation energy, and then
Exactly. Yep.
and a catalyst will lower that activation energy so
Yep.
you can get it over the hump.
That's exactly right. So a catalyst is most often someone you already respect or admire in your own social circle who votes. The simplest link to getting someone to vote is if they know someone who votes. So you tend to see clusters of people and everyone in them votes. And then over here are clusters of people and no one in them votes. And like what changes those non-voting circles is when one member starts and just expresses that they thought it mattered to them. Or there's other simple messages like, there's this thing where if you tell people, oh, really high turnout, everyone is voting, more people will go vote.
Yeah.
It becomes like a social norm effect of like, well, I'd be embarrassed not to now, you know? So there's an effect that we measure, that we see, and then every campaign bombards people with that message to the point where it becomes, you know, it no longer has a substantial outcome. But yeah, people are looking for those catalysts. What is it that moves people? So the biggest thing that's attributed in this last election to the 50% growth in the 18 to 24-year-old vote is the Parkland shooting and the March for Our Lives group. The number one cited reason for people under 24 to have voted now is gun control. And that is a stark change. It has not been anywhere in the top 5 in any prior year.
I heard there was some legislation on the docket, or maybe that's went out by the new House, that they were wanting to revamp voter registration in addition to a whole lot of voter suppression things. But do you have any faith that that's going to go anywhere? Or is that kind of like dead legislation?
Are you talking about the federal
The
house or
automatic
state
voter,
house?
the House, I think
Federal.
the federal House, they talked
Yeah,
about
because I was about to
automatic.
say, state literally started today.
Yeah.
So.
They both, so federal house started on yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And today, so to that end, there are a number of bills at the federal level for improving voting rights, mostly designed around fixing the holes from the now broken Voting Rights Act, which was started in 1965 and sort of died in 2013. In addition, expanding things like online voter registration and automatic voter registration, which you mentioned. It's very unlikely that that goes very far because we have divided government, and right now there's a partisan argument over whether or not, you know, more voter registration is good for one party or not. So there are some studies that show that Democrats get a bump, albeit a small one, from improved access to voter registration, and there are some studies that show kind of no effect. And so, depending on which side you are, the Democrats are arguing it's the no effect studies, obviously, and the Republicans are arguing it's the Democratic studies, you know, that are right. So you have this odd case where they're advocating that this is good for the other side, sort of thing. In the state house, there's a number of bills. So there's an effort to expand access to vote by mail. There's the effort to pass online voter registration. There's the effort to reduce or increase the number of forms of ID that would allow someone to vote, so to include student ID. There's broad agreement on all of them between Republicans and Democrats right now, supposedly, other than online voter registration. So, and Governor Abbott has stated unequivocally that he will veto any online voter registration or improvements to voter registration that comes across his desk. If he holds to that, then it likely wouldn't go anywhere, but there are a number of Republicans both on the bureaucratic executive side and in the legislature, who think it would save the state a lot of money. It would also make it much easier to catch fraud if people were committing it, if we had, you know, a computer to run that check. Much harder to do with 21.5 million paper records. So,
I can also say off the top of my head, I don't know if there's a specific bill they're supporting, I'd have to check, but there is an advocacy group also called Citizens for Voter Choice. They're specifically working on trying to get the legislature to eventually introduce and pass a bill that would basically create a petition gathering system for signatures, the main goal of which being that currently it is incredibly difficult for third parties to get on the ballot in Texas because it's a 50,000 signature threshold. They're wanting to try to get an online system created so that the Libertarians and Greens and other parties can get on the ballot much easier. So that's also a thing that is going on.
so you would see in that case though, like, both parties probably would support it.
Oh yeah, all the mainstream parties need that.
There are some things that bring all Americans together, like stepping on the neck of anybody else.
So I guess I have two questions. One of the issues with, I guess with registering voters, and party affiliation is like right now, like I have van access, so I can see if someone in Texas.
This is the Democratic database.
Yes. So I can see if someone has voted in a Democratic primary, if they voted within the state of Texas.
That's correct.
But I cannot see if they are someone who moved to Texas from somewhere else where they had a primary affiliation.
Yeah. It's in the same CRM. It goes back to the database you're referring to. So that this is the really advanced world of, you know, data machines in politics. They're all using a 2004 era database that hasn't been
It's really awful.
It's a CRM tool where the UX was designed in 2004, and they really have not updated it. Yeah, it was bad. It was revolutionary, but bad, right? At the time.
I can tell you all government systems are on an average of 10 to 15 years out of date.
So to that
I speak
end,
from
the
experience.
CRM has that for every state. But for whatever reason, they decided that the way they needed to build this was to get an individual contract with each state party, and to have a different database, a different table with the records for those people in that one, and only accessible inside of that geofence, which means that if you move from Oklahoma as a registered Democrat to Texas, where we don't register by party, the people in Texas can't see it, but the people in Oklahoma sure can. And we can see every Texan who moves to other states. There's like very little chance of that being fixed more broadly. All of that's publicly available data.
Yeah.
There's this effort right now underway. Reid Hoffman has been funding an effort to build a data trust, which is meant to unify these things and then deliver it back to everybody. But the state parties would then get less money that then they could sell off, and so they're opposed, even though it would give them better data and make all of their volunteers and activists better informed and better able to actually connect with people and get the votes to win for their party. But the party would make less money, so obviously can't do it. So long-standing problems. And it's mostly an issue of all of the people in charge of each party are above 70 and 80. And they don't, anybody who works on the engineering team reports to somebody who works on the fundraising team, almost exclusively. And so the priorities of both organizations are fundraising, always. And then below fundraising is the communications team, right? And so then the communications team below that is the field talk to voters, to engage people team. And then under that is the tech people. And so you can see how the priorities for planning the architecture are very well stacked together.
And then the other question's more about your thing. Have you thought about adding in some questions in order to target people for absentee ballots?
Yes, so we already have a hidden click-through. When people are over 65, it will automatically ask them.
College students.
So college students is a harder problem.
Yeah, it is
If you register a college student to vote, right, they're allowed to vote in either their hometown or where they currently reside. This is true if you're working abroad or if you're living away from home. Everyone's free to decide where your residency lives, and there's actually no residency real challenges out there. We could all decide to live in Montana tomorrow, and technically we could all register to vote there. It would not be hard. But they're very unlikely to vote if we're asking them to mail it back home. They're highly likely to vote if we ask them to vote where they are, because what happens is you talk to them now, then they go about their life, and college is full of things where voter registration and voting is very important. It's critically important. Everybody talks about it at the parties, the boys and girls get together and they talk about voting. You know, they're very clear-headed on this, right? So when it comes time to vote, they've totally forgotten, and they're wandering around, and if there's a place that says vote here right now, it takes 2 minutes, they're like, meh, like I'll go ahead,
Yeah.
I'll vote there. But otherwise, you see like a 20% drop off if you're asking them to mail it back. It's still sometimes a good option, and so it can be worth doing, but it kind of results in lower turnout compared to registering them at their current location. So it's tricky, and so there's a lot of decision making there. So part of that is how to communicate that to someone, to say like, you kind of have this option that's convoluted. If you do A, it's good for kind of us, for the idea of promoting democracy. If you do B, because like you think you're gonna move back home, you'll probably forget later. No, please don't choose B. But it's kind of not, but it is their choice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't do it automatically, because there's no way to know that someone is a college student per se from our current flow. So it would require another click, and we could potentially look at that. But that part's already built, and it's automatic.
So, in the first two buckets of why people don't vote,
Yeah.
I think it doesn't matter, and what was the second one?
They don't believe the people in charge would listen to them anyway.
Gotcha. Assuming 55% of these dots
Feel
fall
that
into
way.
those categories,
Right.
like what do you consider a win for this? Is this
Yeah.
like, if you can reduce the number of dots on this map by 30%, is that good? Is reducing it by 80%? Is it reducing it by 10%?
Reducing it by 10% would be the best program that's ever been run in the history of the country. Like better than the federal registrars going down during Reconstruction, better than post-Jim Crow Freedom Riders. Because despite all the Freedom Rider efforts, right, like Alabama and Mississippi haven't really changed their particular, who they're electing. And so 10% would be an enormous gain. That would be incredible. I would love to see that number.
So is that just
30% is
attacking
probably the
category?
ceiling. Like, say again.
Is that just is that just not going after the 55%, going after some other
It's
20%
partly,
who are just like,
it
don't
could,
know it's voting?
that could be the case, right? And if we could strategically know how people felt before we talked to them, we would probably prioritize in that order. But we don't know how to tell yet. Does that make sense? Now, there's a piece here that we eventually want to append. There's a company here in Austin called People Pattern. It's like on Peter Now's. That is a really good social media commercial marketing company. And they can tell from everybody's tweets and Facebook posts and online behavior what your top issues are and which way you lean and how much money you make and all kinds of stuff. And they sell that to commercial companies to try to target you for coffee ads and sneakers and other crap. But it would actually just be useful to know what people are talking about, not to try and predict how they're going to vote, but instead to try to talk to them about like, hey, it turns out you really care about internet privacy and digital civil liberties. Like, but that's a very precise, application. So what we would like to do is build out the social graph of kind of who knows who and append those social media records from the Twitter handles and other things. And then a group like this, we could give you 500 targets in Austin who are essentially aligned with the mission of this organization, and many of you probably already know those people. And so you could partition them. And we ran a pilot study in West Houston that took 300 people from Hindu temples, Jewish synagogues, a number of other religions and groups, and brought them together, and we printed out binders, just rosters of people who were Tagalog speakers from the local area, or lists of citizens of one demographic or another, and they would go through and they would highlight the ones they knew manually. And from those 300 people, we had about 12,000 successful conversations between them to their friends that they already knew, and 10,000 of them committed to voting for the candidate of their choice, which is one of the most successful programs we've ever run, had a very high turnout rate. So we're looking at automating that process. that's what I work on separately at Blue Squad, which is the progressive political tech company that we're standing up. But we're basically trying to connect all that so you can identify people you already know and help them get registered to vote. Because it's actually pretty easy for us to tell you which of your friends on email, phone, Facebook, LinkedIn aren't registered, because we can tell whether they're in the database or not. It's pretty easy.
You said that other similar groups got their websites like completely destroyed. Do you have an automation process if that happens to you to recreate it with another provider?
Yes, so we took pieces and buried them, in certain places so we could stand it back up, and the database every night, saves itself and walls itself off. For that reason, it's mostly a problem for reclaiming the credibility of your email accounts and your text messaging accounts, because once you start spamming, the commercial providers that undergird those on the email and SMS networks will flag you as a spammer, right? And then groups like vote.org, they essentially have cold domains now, and they have to warm them back up. And so they have to establish emails that connect to people and people respond to, and there's warm conversations in order to be treated like a normal entity again. So it's a serious inconvenience. And in particular, lots of people lost enormous amounts of data. So we do have that on our end. And we just try to make it, we're using still public information that the state would have anyway. So honestly, the only reason they're hitting us is to prevent the actual effort from underway. But yes, we thought of that. It's probably not robust enough is the answer. Yes.
So, given who we are, I feel obligated to ask this question. On the one hand, hearing that, you eventually like to make a tool where I could find 500 people who love digital civil liberties in Austin, and I can turn them into my little army of lobbyists. Sure, that sounds wonderful, but I have to say, currently this tool, I don't have much of a problem with it. It's public data. It doesn't tell you anything about anybody. But as you said, to make it more and more effective, I could see the temptation to slowly add more and more and more data. How do you prevent this from becoming a Cambridge Analytica weapon?
Yes, so Cambridge Analytica, for those of you who don't know, was a social graph company that worked for a billionaire named Robert Mercer, who was affiliated with Ted Cruz. And he deployed this whole company on behalf of Ted Cruz in the 2015 and 2016 primary. When Ted Cruz lost, they then switched and made it available to Donald Trump. And they ran what they called psychographic profiling on everybody from Facebook quizzes that they've been running for years. Which Harry Potter character are you? And then they would profile those people and then claim to be able to predict their behavior and what they like and that sort of thing, right, with the social graph, to better target advertisements.
But as part of that, they pull all their friends. And all
Yes, so the way that Facebook's original graph API worked, it wasn't just them, right? This is like a feature, not a bug. Facebook's social graph let you pull, if you are all my friends on Facebook, and I take the quiz about which Harry Potter character am I just gave away all of your data. And that's how Facebook was designed to work. It was very valuable in those days, and I'm really annoyed that we didn't capture all of that in time. And I'll tell you why. So there are 7 subsidiaries of Cambridge Analytica now. So Cambridge Analytica lied about taxes. They did a bunch of dumb stuff. It's not illegal to use Facebook's tool the way that they did. It is illegal to shelter funds and illicitly pay for various criminal actions in foreign countries that have much harsher laws than we do. And their whole company, and they violated a number of laws about spying and espionage in Britain, because Britain has stronger privacy laws. And they completely folded, but not before selling off chunks to 7 subsidiaries, all owned by the same guy still, right? So one of them is here in Austin, and is working on behalf of Texas candidates. And there's essentially, the way I look at it is, we've all built these social graphs, right? We've given over our data to Facebook and Twitter and Google in exchange for something, right? I get Gmail as a result of letting Gmail read the contents of every email I send, right? And Gmail uses that to build learning, it does language learning, and it improves recommendations for how I should respond and all that. But the company is using my data for their purposes, and to sell. And I think it would actually be really good to take all of that information and make it publicly available so you can use it for your purposes. So our idea is not to put publicly on a map, like my name and all the things I care about in my tweets and everything else. It's instead to make it easy for you to log in through your Gmail account or your Facebook and see all of those exports from that GDPR forces these companies to make compliant, and then to turn around and let you use that for whatever issue advocacy you want for your friends, but not for you to give away your friend's contact information to some third party. Because the difference is, what they essentially did was they turned all of us into unwitting participants in giving away each other's privacy. And that doesn't feel right. But if we instead turn it around and you can use your friend network that you have, right, in email, just like if you're a very good extrovert, you could list your friends by what they care about and invite them to the right events. But not everybody's good at that, not everybody has time to keep track of that. But if we make it very simple for people to array their own neighborhood, their own friends that they already have contact information to, and to inform them when somebody might be interested in a particular event, and not sell that to the toothpaste companies of the world and everybody else. I actually think that would be a fairer playing field, because there are all these people out there that have taken that information from us already, and so it's kind of interesting to me to be able to see what it is what kind of person they think I am. And since I have 3 younger sisters on my Netflix account, I can tell you no entertainment company knows what the fuck I am. Because I checked.
Remember, inject noise into the signal, people.
Yes.
Keep it up.
Have you done any, like looking back at, you've done the work to register these people, track that process and gone back and see if they actually did vote?
We did. So I got 82% of these people ended up voting. And I say I got. The organization achieved that. But like we only sent the one reminder, and mostly it's the work of volunteers on the ground who actually did that contacting. But yeah, so that was what we can see so far.
So follow up to that is, has there been any effort to contact the people that didn't vote?
There has not yet. There's a second skin of this that will go up to a particular subset, which are people who got registered but did not vote. And a series of survey questions that are designed to just say, like, what would you actually want? Like, you theoretically are king of the government for a day. How would you do it? What do you want? And then from that, we would like to make that available to like Gallup or Pew to publish, so that people, hopefully, Republicans and Democrats alike, would look at that and say like, okay, like I know how to talk to those people now and what they might care about to go get them to vote for me. And in my mind, that takes the arms race into the realm of what it's supposed to be. Very idealistic.
I'd be curious to see if the percentages of reasons why they didn't change after the effort.
Yeah, exactly, because they went through the effort of signing up, getting mailed a thing, filling it out, didn't send it back, got all these emails and text messages, ignored them, right? So like clearly something, most likely they got busy, they went on a vacation, they don't check their mail regularly. How many of you have mail lying on your counter unopened right now? Like I bet, yeah, exactly. See? And so there's just things like that that come up in people's lives. We have an arrangement with, if you're familiar with Crooked Media or Pod Save America, in the spring they'll be pushing this out to everybody who signed up for one of their products in the last year or listens to it as a test case. And we're specifically going to do this, which is everybody, do this so I don't rip it away, around a given point, it'll give you the 5 nearest addresses, and it'll just ask you, would you mind going and helping your neighbors either register or ask them, what it was that kept them from voting. Like, what would they need to actually, take that last step? And we intend to run that, and we're gonna publish those results publicly.
I figured this is effort so new that it's just not.
I haven't done it yet. So the Secretary of State only released who voted on January 2nd. So I've only just gotten the calculations done by district and county and demographic as to who those are. And I feel like I owe a report to our generous $5 donors, like I said earlier, just in keeping with good practices. But that's definitely what we're planning to do. There's time, so we want to build it well and make sure that it works well and doesn't violate people's sense of privacy. So an interesting thing about this during the election, a couple people would show other people the map and be like, "You're on the map." And most people really thought it was cool, and a solid handful thought, you know, we were out to murder them.
I was actually just thinking of asking, like, do you get pushback from some of the people who don't want to vote when they find out they're on your tour
Totally,
here?
but the nice thing is you can just get cleared off. There's an option in the selection tree that people can just say.
So people can opt out.
Yeah,
You know, of course,
people-
they're not opting out of that. You're just scraping publicly available data, but you won't show them in this tool.
That's exactly right. So we do that. But what I want to always tell them is like, do you remember phone books? Like people think it's really weird that you could know someone's address. And I was like, I never thought it was strange. You got it delivered to your house and you like flipped it open. And I was like, you know, in elementary school or middle school or whatever, you look up a friend and like you go on your bike and you roll down to their house and like, I didn't know where you lived before, but I found you. And that was totally not abnormal, but now we've moved away from that. And it is, people think it is so weird that it's publicly available, but there's literally a website called whitepages.com.
It's another adverse effect of the internet.
Yeah.
It's made knowing an address creepy.
It made it, and for totally valid reasons that people have concerns about safety, it's just that it's such a shift in behavior. Because I mean, I'm telling you, like, if anybody wants to find your address and you want to participate in society, it is super easy.
I mean, if any of you own any kind of property, it is absolutely trivial to find out where you live.
If you've ever downloaded any mobile game,
Insurance.
Or I guess expanding on that, I mean, it's a little bit more than just the white pages or something. You're doing like subtractive filtering based on
Yes.
public data.
there is some
And
sort
so
of implication
Are you
about it.
worried about, maybe unintentionally exposing a correlation you didn't think about?
Yes.
Like,
So-
oh, this is like a Hispanic part of town, and for some reason these 2 blocks aren't in our system. There's like an 80% chance they're undocumented.
Yes, so
Law enforcement
we
looks
thought
at that.
about that. So the big thing that we looked at is that there's a database of dreamers, right?
Right.
Where they live,
Sure,
their name,
yeah.
and everything else. And there's a database actually of known undocumented immigrants, which is what they use to go actually, round people up.
Right.
Honestly, I could really use the database because I could screen all those people out. Like, so if anybody knows somebody there, just have a thumb drive. But we did think about that. We tested it thoroughly before we ever put it online to make sure that it couldn't be used in that way. And so the answer is that like the number of dreamers in the country is below 1% of these dots. And even though they do occur in clusters, we don't show any information that somebody could figure that out from. And it's not even scrapable because we only show a certain amount of dots at a time depending on the zoom level, and it maxes out at 500. So you can't even scrape, and there's no names, so you couldn't even identify the particular demographic you were looking for unless you already knew a lot about that area.
So the fact that you do limit the automatic scraping of your API, you're preventing somebody from taking a big data algorithm and trying to make a correlation pop out that could potentially target a vulnerable group from this data set.
Partially, I think anybody with that competency could achieve it by going to the state and getting the public data.
They just go to the public data.
So it's really it was a calculation for us of the benefit versus the potential harms. We considered that people who are mad about politics right now might go harass their neighbors, which we consider a form of encouragement. No, I would recommend inspiring. It's unfortunately like right now people just walk around randomly house to house and they knock on every door, or they target them based on their primary voting history, right? Or like
Bruce Alpha
If you live in
used
Travis,
to,
yeah.
if you wanted to go door to door, he could get you he was doing
there
this.
are free maps available for Travis
Yes.
County alone.
And so people would do this as
Yep.
a fun activity very
There's
frequently.
any number of heat maps out there. So we weighed this, we looked at it, we decided that it couldn't really be well used in that malign way.
Yeah.
But it was a serious consideration of ours. We didn't want to enable the mistreatment of people. The goal was, it's like Nextdoor, right? Like Nextdoor is designed to be a place where you and your neighbors can like all talk together. And like, I don't really use it, but I've seen it a few times, and universally the comments are atrocious, right?
It's a great way to find out your neighbors are
It's
crazy.
it's like asking everyone in your neighborhood to get together and say their worst YouTube comments aloud or something. It's just like, it's not an ideal communication method. Much better to get together and have. I think like Nextdoor should be an events-only platform. There's a party, you can come interact with humans. It's harder to be nasty in person.
depends on the neighborhood.
It does depend entirely on the neighborhood. Great leadership changes that. And that's kind of what we're trying to promote here, is the idea that there are people out there who are very, very good at helping their own neighbors and helping their own community, and we want this to be available to them. Again, because the expectation that all of us have time to become an election expert and to dig into all this public data and to sift through all of these things, you know, individually, seems just very bad. And the idea that neither Republicans nor Democrats have come up with a good way to let their own volunteers actually have access to the basic information of like who is even allowed to vote is kind of embarrassing. And so mostly we're just one-upping. No. Yeah.
So, publicly available information, that was decided to be published by somebody at some point.
The legislature, it's all statutory.
And so have you come across public information that you were like, wow, that was really dumb to make that public?
Yeah, so turns out public water utilities, you know, so we all presumably, you know, pay our water bill to the city of Austin. That's a public utility, which means I can FOIA that thing and get your name and address and how much money you paid and everything else. I mean, it's not like, it's a problem because the reason voter rolls became public in the first place was to combat the mistreatment of people by county and state officials. So, you know, people would, oh, you want to register to vote? Cool, like, tear this up, throw the trash can, light it on fire. There's like nothing you could do. They would just be like, no, we processed their form. It's in the works, right? And like, it'll, you know, and they'd go do it in the back end or whatever. And so making the voter rolls public was a part of a federal effort to force states to be responsible to reporters and to candidates and to voters, because you can check if you voted now. But before, nobody could check, so everyone was taking the Secretary of State at their word that like, oh, it's 203 to 0, you know, like, don't know how that happened. There was just no method of backing it up. So the intent of that move was to make it fairer. It's the same with public utility data, to make sure that people aren't being systematically mistreated for their race or their gender or their age. And so, you know, I go back and forth on like, we're kind of in this impasse where we both want more digital privacy and we don't want to be manipulated and maligned. And at the same time, by making things public, you actually, if there are entities that use it, you can actually defend people from some of that malignment. And it's hard because there aren't a lot of great public entities that do that sort of work. So we kind of see the negatives a lot more than we see the positives. There's no group that monitors of Facebook, right?
I'm correct that while, you know, that you, as you said, there's a system that lets you verify that your vote was counted, it doesn't give any information about how you voted.
That's correct. And nobody in the entire state ever knows how you voted, because your name is never on, there's no name or ID number on any ballot. And so there's like a triple check process to make sure that the count of the number of people who signed in is the count of the number of codes entered on the machine, is the count of the vote tally. So it's actually pretty secure in that regard for the purposes of voting.
Yeah, so you said you had an effort where you were trying to get people to go to their closest neighbor to help encourage them to vote.
Yep.
Do you have anything trying to exploit like a social graph of like?
Yes, so that was what I was intimating earlier, is we can right now we have a tool that works that will show email, phone, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can put any of those exports in that you'd like. It's an engine that runs it, does the matching, builds on the social graph, but it tracks the sourcing, so that it returns a list to you and only you, with the prompting from the system of like, here's an array of who would be useful.
Here's the next 5 people. Here's your next closest 5 friends.
Out of all your friends on your various accounts, you probably give us their address.
But we want to protect that sourcing, so that if you ever said like, okay, I got the information, I don't want to delete it, you delete it, it undoes everything you put in. And so our idea with that is, by leaning into the privacy file, we can actually do more to help people rather than trying to be another Cambridge Analytica.
And I'm correct that you said that the code is openly available on GitHub, so a third party could audit what your code does?
It is for everything but the social graph. That would be a little bit more problematic. So that part is not per se, but it is compliant with GDPR, which has certain provisions and requirements.
Okay.
Amy, if you were next.
I wondered if anybody had thought about genealogy.
Like the genealogy data?
there's a ton, for example, in Texas, if you are over 22, readily available is your date of birth, your parents' full names, including your mother's maiden name, what county you were born in. And from that data, you can actually build family trees because you can look for pairs of parents and then children and then cousins. And then you go to like sites like Ancestry.com or other sites, and there are whole trees. I mean, you can really, literally. I'm not saying that this would necessarily be it's one of those good ideas that can be used either way.
Sure. I don't know of anyone using it on the political side, and I think that's, my intuition would be that the automation of that kind of work is pretty much housed in the Ancestry.com and the 23andMe's of the world. You say there's publicly available?
In Texas, it's incredibly publicly available.
But I just mean the actual running of the analysis and the matching and the record matching to public files presumably is a little bit more complex, especially given the volume of women whose names would change after a certain amount of time.
Well, because of the stickiness of Texas, meaning that people don't tend to leave as much.
I don't know anything about
You
anybody
could
using
actually,
it for political purposes.
because those marriages are also recorded with the full names of the spouses and their ages.
But you can search that on the internet.
Yes, it's all public information.
I will take a look just to see what could be done with it.
You could, no, I've done it.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. So I don't know anything about that per se, so I really couldn't comment more on it.
Interface design question for you.
Yes.
If I'm interpreting this correctly, each dot is a household, not necessarily a registered voter. You mentioned low fidelity data.
That's correct.
What does an apartment complex look like here? I can see where this works really well for single family homes.
Is there a known Wi-Fi password here? This can be very easily done. I got it on the spot. I will show you. So we scraped every apartment complex in the country and inferred their unit numbers based on their postal codes. And that includes duplexes, quadplexes, anything of the sort. So I can show you an apartment complex. It basically, we're adding in a different color to make it easier to see, or a different probably style. And then you click it, it gives you a breakout by unit number, which ones you need to go to. So people inside of apartments can use it as well. And the goal is to make this actually a much better interface. We had an interface before that was all volunteer developed. One of those volunteers worked for a company and a PAC who both claimed ownership of any of his IP, of any code he developed. And he worked on our front end and design. And so in order to spare him from legal battles and us, we just excised the entire front end that we were using before the election. There's actually an article in Wired that's photos of the original interface, but we had a UI UX designer work on it a lot. And we've gone back to a simpler heat map to avoid just getting him into a mess. Great employment contracts we all have here. You had a question?
Yeah, let's see what I want to ask. So you voted absentee at some point in the past, and that kind of leads into the voter privacy thing. I think a lot of us would be interested in. I'm curious what your thoughts are in general, and I guess everyone else is kind of. Do you feel like absentee ballot is like seeing a little bit of our secret ballot sort of concept in this country, where there is the potential for someone to try to coerce you to vote a certain way?
Yes.
If you have a piece of paper where you're putting your votes on it. So how do you feel about that in the context of making more broadly available versus maintaining their privacy?
So in general, in a bygone era, there was a lot more coercion that took place in forcing people to vote a certain way. It's still a problem in places that have vote by mail, but it has generally been seen as a pretty small scale one. There's a professor at UC Irvine, I think his name is Richard Hazen, does election law, and they've actually studied this particular issue because it's kind of one of the counterpoints. But I'll pull this up and run it. But essentially, expanding access to vote by mail dramatically increases the number of people who vote. And the number of self-reports of coercion or problems are exceedingly rare, except for this year in North Carolina.
One congressional district.
Yeah, one congressional district. There's 2 counties where a gentleman appears to have engaged in a by the thousands vote harvesting scheme where they
multiple times.
They
multiple
stole,
years of this.
Yeah, they stole elderly voters' ballots were their mail and filled them out for them. That's a pretty rare thing, and fortunately did not get away with it. But you can't entirely avoid that, especially in the family itself. There's issues of parents filling out their kids' ballots because they didn't like the way their kids were planning to vote. Kids filling out their parents' ballots is pretty common, especially if you have elderly parents who are under care. There's lots of people who will take that. It's very hard to catch. It's pretty much impossible in my mind to stop.
Well, I mean, that's why you would go in, right?
But if you limit it to people who can only go in person, you kind of reduce the entire disability community's ability to do it, the elderly, which is incredibly disenfranchising.
Right.
And the reason we adopted that vote by mail procedure was to help fix the problem of people being discriminated against based on age and disability. So that's an unfortunate trade-off, and like I think in general, trusting in the mostly goodwill of most people inside their own families seems to work out okay, I would say. It doesn't appear to be that it's even close to equivalent. And in particular, states like Oregon don't have any in-person voting. And they have the highest rate of participation in both registration and turnout. So everyone is automatically registered, everyone gets mailed the ballot automatically. They fill it out at leisure, at home, they can drop it off in person, they can mail it back. It makes it really simple. North Dakota doesn't even have voter registration. They just use normal county records. So there's just, I mean, both a super liberal state and a super conservative state have a good system where almost everyone's able to vote just fine. They both maintain control by their respective political party. One didn't result in the flip of the other. So like, it seems to me that the most likely case is that if we expand access to voting, conservative areas will register more conservative voters, liberal areas will register more liberal voters, and you know, if you think that poorer people who actually would then show up to vote would vote a certain way, then you might have a different outcome. But otherwise, it's been a fair bit of a wash so far.
So out of curiosity, so you know, one of the anytime there's initiatives or tools or whatever with the goal to increase voter registration, you inevitably get pushback from Republicans who claim that, well, we can't do this thing because we actually have a massive voting fraud problem.
Yes.
Barring the fact that there is no evidence that we actually have a massive voting fraud problem, have you thought about ways to use maybe this public data and these tools to bolster arguments of saying, no, really, look, there's no fraud problem, and I can prove it using this data, you know? You can verify for yourself, we don't have a problem.
I don't know that we could achieve that argument with what we've designed, and I'm not confident it would be better than the actual studies that have been undertaken by some of the other.
I guess I'm just thinking first, maybe there are people who they don't believe the studies because it's a liberal academic, but if they can verify with the records for themselves that.
I think that might make an impact to a limited degree.
You know, anything's better than nothing.
But in particular, it really doesn't show that someone else didn't cheat, in a sense. So it can verify someone didn't cheat you specifically, but it doesn't actually show you that.
I was just curious
Yeah.
if, based on what is publicly available, if you guys had any discussions, with whatever data is publicly available, if there would be a way to investigate that potentially.
We haven't talked about it. I don't see an easy and obvious way, and I think it's mostly a cultural argument at this point.
I know, I'm just asking hypothetically.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is actually just to help your local counties, your local city governments, like actually communicate and talk with people inside their districts. The main problem is that like small counties are dramatically underfunded, right? There's one full-time judge and a part-time worker who will together try to handle several thousand people's, information, and that can be pretty difficult to grapple with for them, especially if they're 80 years old, they're doing their best, they don't know what every year the state puts out a new confounded computer system, and some guy's walking around with a map, not even sure why it's here. Got a weird long hair and beard thing going on, must be a hippie from Austin. So it's just it's stuff like that, right? That you're contending with in trying to, more often the problem is negligence or scale than it is malice, right? So people are confused by this thing of 325 million people running around voting in ways that don't make sense to them because of because of people siloing themselves off, you see a lot of folks who will say like, I don't know a single Democrat, or I don't know a single Republican. So how on earth could Hillary Clinton have gotten more votes? How on earth could Donald Trump have won the election? I literally can't name one. And so they're actually struggling with the mental grappling of like, 300 million people is just a lot. And it's just an order of magnitude that human brains can't deal with, and it's very unlikely that we're going to do a great job of convincing them otherwise. In the meantime, it's really about, if anything, it's the authority figures, right? So it's going to certain people and convincing them that it's in their best interest to not have a mob angry about the election outcome. But to this end, there's lots of people who feel like they get political traction out of it. And so I would be very interested in anybody's idea to help combat those ideas. I honestly think some of the research out there they have great graphics, great reports, but of course nobody gives a crap what the Florida Atlantic University research study says, because none of us have even heard of that damn school.
So a comment on that, I think that blockchain and some of these sort of technological things could probably solve some of these issues, but one important thing would be lost, and that's anonymity.
To some degree, yes. I think there's people who feel like they could help resolve some of that. What they're more concerned with so there was a blockchain experiment in West Virginia for absentee voters and overseas voters, because it was pretty safe to do there. No one thought the election was going to flip. And they haven't released a report of how that went yet or how many people used it. The general concern from cybersecurity experts is that it's not the algorithm of blockchain, like the math that goes into it, that is the problem. It's the internet architecture. And so right now, pretty much anything in the DC region or any of the major industrial regions, the actual internet infrastructure is hacked, by foreign espionage groups who are trying to get military information from companies. And it's pretty easy to do. Like, we did a great job with electromagnetic rings in Russia back in the 80s, right? It's just like a constant battle back and forth between our cybersecurity institutions and others. And if you can read the underlying infrastructure, that actually circumvents the blockchain defense of the actual data packets. And so while the algorithm on both ends is safe, it's the in-between connection that is considered to be vulnerable right now. So it doesn't necessarily solve that. And what it does do is kind of prevent auditing. So there's some concern, I think, and again, not a blockchain expert. I merely take the kind of folks who are out there at their word on this. So there's disagreement right now, and so they're testing it. I don't know how that will shape out. I would love for someone with quantum encryption in America to come up with a better solution. Honestly, paper seems to work mostly just fine, and lots of states have machines that print a paper ballot out. You turn that in, it's a Scantron, it gets read, and then there's a ticket that comes out of the machine at the end as well. So you have a count from Scantrons, you have a count from the machines, you have a count from the poll books. People can verify themselves online. Like, there's a number of checks and balances to that sort of methodology that seem to be pretty robust. And it gives people two opportunities to verify that their vote is correct, on the machine and on the printed receipt. And they have an opportunity to fix it. So in my mind, that kind of simple solution is a little bit better. What I would worry about is someone particularly clever who doesn't share our values somehow finding a way to manipulate something where we've kind of put it all in one silo. And I think there's just, from my special operations hat, there's risk there. So for example, when I was in the military, one of my jobs was traveling around the world doing hostage rescue. People used to consider WhatsApp like a very secure messaging service. And it was great when everybody felt like that was true. We really appreciated it when ISIS and other groups would communicate on WhatsApp. Even though it had end-to-end encryption. But then somebody leaked it, and then they all switched to Telegram, which was secure for a time, and then they all switched to Wicker. and a number of others, like Signal, I think, is probably still safe.
I haven't heard Signal's been ruined yet.
Yeah, so, I mean, the answer to that is, it's an arms race, and like, I wouldn't count on county and state governments being able to keep up on like something as advanced as the blockchain front.
And I guess, I'm not a blockchain expert, but I am a programmer, so I guess just to speak to what I heard
We all have opinions.
a little bit in your question, first of all, I'd say, from a basic cybersecurity standpoint, you're always gonna want paper ballot backups just because no electronic system is completely secure from a hacking attempt, so you're always going to want a physical medium backup that, cannot be hacked unless you actually pay somebody to mess with the ballots, which is much harder. Second of all, I think to your point that you were making of like, oh, well, blockchain, sure, makes voter fraud go to zero, but it also maybe ruins the closed ballot because everybody's votes are public. I think there'd be ways around that, like that you could encrypt the payload of what a person's actual votes were, and you need the right keys to decrypt the payload of the blockchain.
Well, if you look at like Monero, it solves a lot of those problems in the monetary way for private transactions. But I guarantee you, 50 years from now, somebody with a quantum computer can be going through all that data and being like, okay, you bought this from that person then, and all that crap.
Well, yeah, when they get quantum computers off the ground, all our bank statements will be public knowledge.
The answer is like, what we're all working on in our industry at a vast amounts of pace for anybody to able to keep up. But I have some words of wisdom.
This comic is completely true, by the
way. So on the map, are you able to identify like gerrymandering breaks?
We can, yes. We actually have a full shapefile of integrated districts of all types, and we're continuing to add to that.
So increased voter registration in certain neighborhoods would potentially flip a gerrymander?
We can identify areas where like a vote would be more impactful based on, it could have stacked or overlaid competitive districts, like a county commissioner's race and a state house race and a state senate race and a congressional race. So like this particular sliver of 1,000 people, their votes would have 6 times the competitive weight. We have all of that is done. We haven't decided how to deploy it because it really kind of defeats the neighborhood methodology to some degree. What's convenient about this is I have people who walk their dog and they register voters, right? Like there's a very simple approach, or they can go out in the neighborhood. But there are other people who are power users who would want to use it for a targeted purpose. And we are thinking about making it a filter option, if that makes sense. When we built the filter, we just haven't decided if it will distract from the purpose, because if people take 3 hours to drive to the best competitive area, where they're probably going to get 10 to 50 people registered, but then they drive 3 hours back, they've lost the chance to do 100 or 150 in their own neighborhood, if that makes some sense. But for some people, that's what they care about, and we kind of want to enable them any way we can, so we're thinking about it. It's a pretty easy shapefile solution.
So I have I'm one of those that would want to go, there,
Sure.
because one of the things that we observed during the campaign is that at the end of the day, number of votes count, but the impact of going to a neighborhood that there's almost nobody that votes because people never went there. If you get to really talk to 2 people there, it's worth the same amount of talking to 30 people in a very populated area, because that one person plants a seed that person is going to be that catalyst. So because of that, I think it's very helpful to have the info, like, this.
I mean, I built it, so I kind of intend to use it. But we want to think thoughtfully about the impacts of what we do, because we might be depriving people who are in need of a community intervention, but they're not in a competitive, quote unquote, location, right? We don't want everyone to ignore them. Does that make some sense? So that's the only trade-off we're kind of weighing. Is that yes, in the world of political gamesmanship, it does matter where you vote. And the electoral geography is important, but also people's ability to exercise their basic right is kind of important to us as well. And so trying to blend those together is, I think if just providing more information is going to help you all make that choice. So I'm inclined to lean that way, but we want to make sure that we're not creating an incentive structure that ignores certain groups of people. Does that make sense?
Well, no, and actually, and I guess maybe my point was misunderstood.
Yeah.
Is that, because from a campaign perspective, right, the goal was to always target the areas that had more people.
Yeah,
Because it's more bigger bang for the buck.
Yes.
But
So
then sometimes the areas that were always neglected were not prioritized because there were not as many people, because they were never voted.
Yes.
But so it's like seeing that from the point of view of going where nobody goes.
Yeah.
Is like, so I have that perspective.
I think that's exactly right. One of the things we've created that is being tested on different mobile versions right now is a little finger drawing tool. So you two could be working together and you could basically zoom into this neighborhood and draw your finger around a couple of houses and assign to Julie, and then draw your finger around another couple of houses and assign to self, right? And then the two of you could go off and circle back to each other, and somebody could do that from wherever. So we're working with the disability community on ways to make this accessible, so it's not just a go to someone's house tool. We're looking at different methods there, and so to that end, the idea would be you could go recruit somebody in that area, and then they could become the person. They just get like sometimes seeing the 500 dots is too much for folks. If you zoom in more, it becomes a lot more manageable, right? So like this is, you can tell which half of the neighborhood I live in, right? So clear, there's a Vaughn over here is the dividing line of where I live. Like these three people just moved in, okay, give me a break. So I gotta go get them soon. And there's a bunch of new houses being constructed, but like I've cleared the board of about 250 people over the last 6 months, mostly as test cases. Like, what are the errors? What am I doing wrong? How can I make this better for everybody?
In terms of political games, Kevin mentioned the 86 regular session starting. If you go to capital.texas.gov right now, search for, I guess, just voter registration, it'll show 31 bills. Bring that up with reference to 2 that already have companion bills, which means they're much further, or much more likely to get through, and that's Senate Bill 103, House Bill 140. That's the automatic voter registration for driver's license and IDs.
So that is a specific case. So in Texas, you need, when you go to the DPS to renew your driver's license, you can register to vote in person on an electronic signing machine, like think 15-year-old credit card signing. They're finally catching up. It still needs a pen, can't do it with a finger. The online portal where you can renew your driver's license has no option for you to do the same thing. And so the interpretation in other states has been that under a 1993 law called Motor Voter Law, the state has to provide people, when they engage with a state services system, the opportunity to register to vote. And since they're engaging online, the state should have to provide something, which would make it really simple for all of us, because we can just renew our driver's license right now and get a whole bunch of people registered. Thank you so much. So to that effect, that bill is addressing that particular lawsuit. I don't know how that one's going to go, because it's kind of a public black eye for Texas right now, and at the same time, the laws on, we won in district, well, I say we won. The ability to do, forcing the state to do this was the district court outcome, and the Attorney General has appealed it to the circuit court, the 5th Circuit Court, who is a very likely defender of whatever interpretation Governor Abbott would want to take. So he will win this political fight most likely if he wants to. But there are advocates, like Republicans in rural areas feel like their communities are struggling, and it would help to have these systems because their DPS offices have been closed in their districts. So there's a co-sponsor, the guy who's the chairman of the rural caucus has been a Republican, who's been very supportive. And so there's people who just feel like it's unfair, and they don't care about which party it affects. But then there's other people who see a political game to everything, and once you take a stance, you can't move off of it, that sort of thing. So it's tricky to see how that one will play out, because Governor Abbott has veto authority and is threatened to use it on this bill. Republicans probably wouldn't override, there's probably not enough of them. And so it just matters whether one of them could convince him that it would be worth it. So I don't know how to predict that one. It is also an ongoing lawsuit. And it's all kind of, it's very nuanced, it's very complicated, but the outcome is just they're like, most people aren't paying attention and talking to the governor about that. In particular, they're talking the number, so similar to the two things that people most say are the reasons they don't vote. The two reasons they say they vote the most in Texas are immigration and border security as two separate categories, which makes up more than 5 times as much as any other category like healthcare when you add those two together. So UT's been running a study every year asking people what matters to them, and the top 2 things in Texas are always border security and immigration. And so whatever side people fall in that debate, those are just the issue that half of Texans are bringing up the most. So this kind of niche thing about like repairing a technical improvement to the online driver's license renewal process, I don't know how that's gonna go. It could slip through, it could, slip out.
How much better than the van is that map when it comes to like when you're walking down the street? Because like in the van, it's like terrible when you're walking down the street because like 4 houses are clustered together, even though they're like spread out.
I was telling everybody about this problem beforehand.
Oh, my bad.
No, not this specific thing. So I had this guy working on this problem, and we fixed the geocodes that you're referring to. So the reason it looks like this right now is these are 10-digit geocodes, and they should be 12 digits. Because if anybody knows anything about GIS, 10-digit is within 10 to 20 meters, and 12 digits is within 1 meter. And so that's the lat launch is just not, they didn't put enough digits in the van specifically. The service provider they're using, they went with the cheap option. So it's close, but not exact. The version that we ran during this last cycle was more exact, but we were using someone, the guy who was working with us is a senior engineer at Waymo and Google Maps, and his IP has been laid claim to. So we cut out all of the stuff he built, just to avoid anybody getting in trouble. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're literally, right now, it's gonna be 14 days until all the geocodes are updated.
How often does this happen?
And I'm on like day 3. It's running on my machine at home. So I heard a question.
No, she had her hand.
Oh, well, so I know that you had a couple of different approaches for getting people registered, like you did the hanging bags for people who were walking around if someone wasn't home, or some campaigns sent out mailers via you, and then also there was the online. Were there any differences between those, which were more effective for registering voters, and then which were more effective for getting people to vote?
The most effective method is people signing themselves up because someone sends it to them. So people texting each other the link. We have little UTMs in the codes that we would put in ads and other things. That is by far the most effective. We saw like plus 90% of the people get registered and vote. So somebody who is like, you know what, I want to vote. Type in my information, be aware of this thing, mail it in, go vote. It's most likely someone who was going to vote anyway, and any other method. This was just convenient. The largest scale approach is mail, direct mail. So we identified everyone who moved into the state of Texas in the last 18 months and had not yet registered to vote at their new address in Texas. And we mailed them all a letter and a form, and that was by far the largest program at scale. And the hit rate is just merely how long they had before the deadline. People who had a month and a half before the deadline was 40% completion. People with a week before the deadline, they had 10% completion, and it's basically linear from there. So we're going to start every month, so that it just takes care of that particular problem. That's people moving to the state or moving around the state, county by county. I'm curious, did anybody get a letter in the mail from any of us? Did anybody move here in the last 2 years?
I mean, I did, but I immediately registered to vote at my new address.
I'm just curious.
Is that moving to Texas, or is that moving to a new place?
Crossing a county line in Texas or crossing the state line?
So you didn't target like within
If people stayed in the same county, they can still vote, and I had limited resources, so I just didn't.
I was same county.
It's my bank account, so I prioritize.
You said that you talked to the Secretary of State about this during the last election cycle, and now the current Secretary of State has stepped down. Are you planning on going and talking to whoever?
We absolutely will. We ran a ton of studies that showed how they can save a lot of money and labor. So increased morale, decreased costs, increased effectiveness of the department, like when you're the Secretary of State, that kind of looks good, right? And Ted Cruz still won, so he can tout it however he likes. So, you know, I don't think there's a particular issue on that front. We help that department run more efficiently with a system that just uses people's existing, it's literally the only change we made to like the system the state currently uses is we set up a system that mails it back to the right county automatically. So it prints a variable return address label for the 254 counties and then tracks that. And that is a revolutionary change for them. They are very appreciative. We will keep working with them as much as we can. The idea is like, if the state government works better, people will trust it more. They will feel like they have more access. The people inside of it will be more proud and able to help people. And that gets the outcome I think that we want, which is for people to feel like they have a say and for the rest of us to get a better government that's not crazy. Like if you take anything to an extreme, you end up with something that doesn't represent the bulk of people. And you know, we see that revisited from time to time. And I think it's working. There's lots of groups working on voter registration in Texas now, where previously, before 2016, everybody had given up on Texas in a really big way. And so things are changing now. Like we're about to be the #1 battleground state in the country, which means like presidential candidates will be coming here and they'll be trying to get into groups like this to speak to 50 people at once to try to get votes for the primary, because they're going to need delegates. If there's 20 candidates running in the primary, then all of a sudden nobody's very likely to get 50%, which means that it's a brokered convention, which means people like delegates get to horse trade over who gets to be president. It'll be a great HBO movie. I'm trying to get the Wi-Fi contract. If I have the Wi-Fi contract, I promise to read and publish every text message about who became president, because that'll be fascinating. I mean, it's like a realistic problem that everybody's going to have. So Texas is about to go through a momentous change. Floridians are like very used to getting just besieged by mail and TV and radio ads and like people coming door to door. And like, if people thought that Beto's text messages and stuff were annoying, like wait till everybody's doing it. It's gonna be great. Like we're all just gonna be like, another text message is probably not from a friend.
I've turned off my text message.
I know. That's so I did.
Thinking about the non-voters,
Yep.
Any thoughts on turning them into protest voters?
So that is so like what that falls in the same camp as any of the others trying to get.
What
the
is a
vote,
protest voter?
Somebody who
You vote for a Vermin Supreme, for example.
Just like a random, whatever.
Or you vote for an independent like Gary Johnson, or you vote for Jill Stein.
Well, don't disparage Vermin Supreme. I want that done.
So, as long as everyone in the survey puts their religion as Jedi, the way New Zealand did, one of New Zealand's official religions is Jedi, because more people selected that than any other religion on their like 2000 census, and by the laws of New Zealand, they had to include it as an official state religion. So if we all do the same thing, it'd be hilarious. It falls in the same camp as trying to get them to vote, which is a category called persuasion. You have to convince someone who doesn't regularly vote to go do a thing. And so most issue groups and political groups probably wouldn't be so interested in putting the resources into go, please tell us all to fuck off. But there's not really, the thing about like an anarchic vote is there's not really an organized group to help promote it, so I don't really see that sort of taking along.
And in
Think of it as like an
theory,
interesting
that's
social challenge. But much more likely is that a third-party candidate that was compelling could easily win. So for all of the vaunted interest of this year's race, there were 4 million people who voted for Beto O'Rourke and 4.2 million who voted for Ted Cruz. So for a total of 8.2, there's 21.5 million adults in Texas who are citizens that could have voted. So like 13.5 million people didn't vote. So, and they each only got 4 million. So like one person who came in and got a third of the remaining vote would win the election. And so the door is wide open. We just kind of culturally, we all believe that it's not, right? But the answer is 2/3 or 3/5 of people in most states are not voting at all. And so it's really kind of anyone's to win if someone can crack the code as to how to persuade someone to believe in them, trust them, whatever that reason is, distrust the system, show the parties that they're failing, whatever that is. If the door is open, and I think the main thing that's lying in front of it is that we all have habits. So like we're all here, we're kind of interested in this topic. I guarantee we'll go home. There's going to be Netflix, Xbox, PC, work. A lot of us are going to do work. You know, family requirements, education requirements. Like we all have habits that we have to get back into. We got to check our email, schedule our calendar events, right? Like, and it's hard to dramatically change people's habits for like I need you to go spend 25 minutes on one day going through and picking this thing that you have to do a lot of research for to feel like you have any, like I think I'm pretty well informed on this stuff, and I had to prep a long time for my ballot because I was like, there's a lot of judicial candidates and I want to pretend I know what I'm talking about when I vote between them, but I literally can't find their websites and I can't find anything about them. I don't know who these people are. What would they do with their power in court? How do I look at their prior court decisions? And then like, do I really have time to bother with this when my vote is not going to change that, right? Like, it's a problem that all of us can recognize. So I think it's a hard challenge. And like, the main thing is, that I find encouraging is there's a whole new crop of people who are stepping up to run for various positions, who are kind of a different caliber of what we're used to. So previously you went to Yale Law School, you came from like a particular sign-on family, or you had a lot of money independently to be able to run. And what's changing now is like people are getting money through online donations, viral videos. They're communicating directly on their phone to a particular subset of people who show up to vote for them, and they're getting elected on the back of that. And so like, that seems promising once we figure out a good way to vet those people. So I don't know, I think it's just as hard in my mind, or perhaps harder, than just getting them to vote for one of the candidates that's on the ballot. Plus they have to be creative enough at the moment. 40 things going on, like how many names can you come up with on the write-in?
So you mentioned that, you know, you're trying to get somebody to do a thing that they normally have not done.
Yeah.
Is there a set of services or a set of actions that people who don't vote do disproportionately more of than other voters?
There's like interesting
like
stuff.
order Domino's. I don't know.
No, that's I mean, honestly, I feel like probably if only we could convince Domino's. It's weird. Most of the pizza joints have
get a pizza and a ballot.
There's actually, so Cards Against Humanity does this thing every year where they order tens of thousands of pizzas on election day and they have them delivered to polling locations for the voters who are in line. So like, you know, pizza is a motivator.
Actually, even better, they currently have a Trump Cards edition, which is exactly what it sounds like. And if you buy it, they are buying land along the border to block the border wall. So go buy Cards Against Humanity.
See all of those.
Delaying it, you know, it's still
there's
hilarious.
things like, so NASCAR is like one of the top ones. People who watch WWE, a lot of football, like
So you're telling me
sports
it's
in
every
general.
stereotype they already implicitly believe.
There's definitely some amount of stereotypes to it, right? Gamers are a huge category that is like highly mixed. There's like a percentage of gamers who like very intensively vote and know a lot of things, right? Like, and then there's this massive category of younger gamers mostly who never have heard of voting, or most candidates who are running. There's I mean, people who watch particular channels in YouTube or categories in YouTube, there's been an effort to try to start figuring out, you know, are they voters or not. I mean, it's kind of an open field in this regard. So traditionally speaking, the campaign apparatus and electoral pieces are, how do you make better TV ads? Better production values, you know, soaring music, like here's me talking with locals, you know, like that sort of thing for 30 seconds. And we all see tens of thousands of those, and they look like stock ads, and that's because they are stock ads. But there's like this effort to make better versions of those and sell them more widely on television. And that's like the main purpose of all political data people, is to figure out where to put the TV ads and in what proportions. And like, that seems like entirely the wrong method. I know there's like, you can do stuff on mobile ads, you can do stuff on, you know, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you can do stuff on Snapchat. There's just any number of people are siloing themselves in meetups and all kinds of things that are publicly, like, you know, they're indicating their preferences online. People are louder and more public with their views than they've ever been in the past. So like, somebody, honestly, like, people who bring commercial products in that are good at this and turn them around to work on political problems, there's an enormous marketplace. So that's like been a stark change that's occurred since 2016, is there's been a bunch of people jumping ship to work on a political tech company that's building a 4-year-old modern tech company thing. Because you don't need the bleeding edge right now. We don't need AI-related insights and neural networks. We literally need heat maps. This is the first heat map
So I
that
guess
a
that's
political campaign has been using.
And that's what I was asking, was like, how, is there infrastructure in reaching this audience that you could just piggyback off of?
Not really, unless you're particularly gifted at like the digital ads that do exist out there. But even then, so for example, like the mobile market has been trying to push, like Funware, has been trying to push the idea of like putting more political ads in like mobile games, because they have high, forget the industry term, but what are those?
Response rates, click-throughs.
Right, the response rate, click-throughs, but also just they complete the ad, right? People watch the full 30-second ad. And the interpretation from advertisers is like the ad is working, people aren't switching the channel, but it's like, no, they want to play the game. Like, that person is waiting to play their game, and they just don't want to pay $2.99 to not have ads.
So everybody, I think probably we could keep going for a while, but we are officially out of time and they're going to kick us out. So with that, I want to thank our speaker for a wonderful discussion. You can stick around. We usually go afterwards for about an hour to have some drinks at Firehouse Hostel and Lounge. So if you know where it is, you can head over there. If not, stick around and there'll be groups going over. Thank you, everybody. See you next month.